Imagine you wake up one morning and everything that gave your life shape is suddenly stripped away. Not slowly, not with any kind of warning, but all at once and completely without mercy, as if the world simply decided overnight that you had been given enough. Your routine, your relationships, your sense of purpose, your sense of who you are, all of it gone. You have nothing left except the bare and bewildering fact that you are still breathing. No map, no familiar horizon, no clear or obvious reason to take the next step forward into another day. And yet, somehow, somewhere deep inside, something in you keeps moving. What is that thing? Where exactly does it come from? And more importantly, what happens when even that small internal flame begins to flicker and fade, when the will to keep going starts to feel like an open question rather than a quiet instinct? These are not comfortable questions to sit with on a weekday morning, but they are exactly the kind of questions that one extraordinary book has been asking its readers for nearly 80 years, and the reason people keep returning to it again and again is that it offers something far rarer than simple answers. It offers a way of seeing, and sometimes that is the more valuable gift. That book is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps during the Second World War and emerged not broken but profoundly transformed, carrying with him a philosophy of resilience and purpose that has since reached tens of millions of readers in countries across the globe. First published in 1946 and translated into dozens of languages, it stands as one of the most significant works at the intersection of modern psychology and philosophy, earning that distinction not through abstraction or theory, but through unflinching, hard-won, deeply personal human honesty. One of the most quietly devastating things this book does in its early pages is force the reader to sit with what it actually means to be stripped of identity. Frankl describes with precision how prisoners arriving at the camps were systematically deprived of everything, their names replaced with numbers, their possessions confiscated, their past lives rendered invisible almost immediately. And yet, something remarkable emerges from this description. He observed that the inner world of a person, the private theater of thought, memory, imagination, and decision, could not be confiscated. He writes that everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms. That freedom, he argues with quiet conviction, is the freedom to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Think carefully about what that really means. Is there a moment in your own life, perhaps even right now, where external circumstances have felt so enormous and so relentless that you forgot you still had a choice in how you met them? That question alone is worth sitting with for a long while. This insight forms the philosophical foundation of what Frankl would later call logotherapy, a form of psychological healing rooted not in the pursuit of pleasure or the accumulation of power, but in the deeply human need for meaning. The book explores this idea across multiple dimensions and with extraordinary care. Frankl observed that among the prisoners who survived the most extreme conditions, physical strength was rarely the deciding factor. What seemed to matter most was whether a person had something to live for, a relationship they were determined to return to, a work they felt called to complete, a belief or a vision of the future they refused to surrender under any pressure. He writes that those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. The psychological weight of that observation is enormous. It reframes suffering not as the ultimate enemy, but as something that can be endured, even metabolized and transformed when it exists inside a larger container of purpose. Have you ever pushed through an incredibly difficult season of your own life because something waiting on the other side made the pain feel temporary and therefore bearable after all? Another layer this book carefully peels back is the relationship between suffering and meaning, and this is perhaps where the thinking becomes most counterintuitive and most lasting.
The book does not romanticize pain.
It does not suggest anyone should seek it out or wear it as a badge. What it argues instead is that when suffering arrives uninvited and refuses to leave, the question shifts. It is no longer about how to escape the suffering, but about what to do with it, how to orient oneself inside it, how to find a posture that preserves rather than destroys the self. Frankl describes moments in the camps where prisoners, even in conditions designed to crush every trace of their humanity, made quiet and deliberate choices to show compassion to someone nearby, to maintain their inner dignity, to protect something interior that no one could reach and no one could take. He observes that suffering ceases to be suffering in some way at the moment it finds a meaning. This idea echoes through centuries of philosophical tradition, the Stoic understanding that we cannot always govern what life brings, only how we choose to meet it. Think about something genuinely painful from your own past. Did it eventually reveal a meaning, even one you never anticipated and certainly never asked for? The book also explores the psychology of hope with a precision that is both clinical and deeply moving. Frankl noticed that certain prisoners did not die from physical causes alone, but from the collapse of their inner orientation toward the future. When a prisoner stopped imagining a future self, stopped reaching forward in their mind toward some point beyond the present darkness, the body often followed the mind into a kind of quiet surrender. He writes about watching men who had endured extraordinary hardship suddenly lose their will to survive when a particular date passed, a date they had privately believed would bring change or rescue. When it did not, the inner architecture that had sustained them began to crumble with frightening speed. This observation asks something quietly of every reader. What future are you currently holding in your mind? And is it vivid enough, specific enough, and real enough to anchor you when the present becomes very hard to stand inside? There is another thread woven through this book that is easy to overlook on a first reading, a sustained and tender meditation on love as a form of meaning-making that does not require physical presence to remain genuinely powerful. Frankl describes moments in the camps where he would think intensely and deliberately about his wife, her face, her voice, the texture of conversations they had once shared easily and without yet knowing how precious they were. He came to understand that the inner experience of love, even in complete separation from the beloved, was one of the most sustaining forces available to the human mind. He writes that the salvation of man is through love and in love. This is not sentiment dressed in poetic language. It is a psychological recognition. The capacity to hold another human being deeply in consciousness, even in memory, even in imagination, is one of the most extraordinary inner resources a person carries into their hardest moments. Think about the relationships in your own life that have carried you through genuinely difficult periods. Was it their practical help that ultimately mattered most, or was it simply the fact of their existence, the quiet and sustaining knowledge that someone was there, that you were held in someone's awareness, even across distance and time? The narrative structure of this book also deserves a moment of attention because it mirrors the book's central argument in a way that feels entirely intentional. Frankl divides the work into two distinct parts: the raw, unfiltered account of life inside the camps, followed by the theoretical framework of logotherapy. Experience first, then meaning. The deliberate architecture communicates something the author understood deeply. Meaning cannot be imposed from outside, and it cannot be handed to a person like a gift. It must grow from within the experience itself, slowly, quietly, and always on its own terms. That insight about how human beings actually construct understanding from chaos, not by avoiding the chaos, but by moving all the way through it and emerging on the other side with new eyes, is one of the most psychologically honest and quietly useful things this book offers its readers. The emotional arc of all of this does not resolve into triumph. It does not offer clean catharsis or the comfortable promise that everything ends well. What it offers is something rarer and more durable,
a philosophical steadiness that does not look away from darkness, but refuses to be consumed by it. The final pages feel less like a conclusion and more like an open threshold, an invitation to carry these questions into your own life, your own search, your own quiet and ongoing encounter with what makes existence not just bearable, but genuinely worth showing up for every single day. Books aren't just stories, they're mirrors that help us understand ourselves better. Comment below, which book should we dive into next? If you enjoyed this, like and subscribe for more thoughtful book analysis. This video uses AI-generated audio and visuals for educational purposes only. This is just one reader's personal thoughts and interpretations.